My name's David Doyle. I'm from Winning Safety. Risk management and why projects need safety. Health and safety comes with a number of different drivers to it. So there's a fantastic campaign that WorkSafe Queensland's running, which is under the tagline, the moments that matter. So to describe that for myself, I've got 5 people at home, and each night I go through the moments that matter because I get home safely. Sometimes with my teenagers, not so much the 5, we're cutting back, but they're all very important to me. For some businesses, the regulatory and the litigation drivers are there. So this is where your board is worried about being sued individually or your company's got workers' compensation claims. But you're all here to talk about it in a project management context. And I guess, put it bluntly, in a project management context, if a health and safety incident, your project can be stopped dead. Now, what can go wrong? Well, that's the bit I don't know. I don't know your businesses, I don't know your people. But what we're going to talk about today is how we can find out in advance. So understanding why we're doing work health and safety and why we're doing risk management is important. You're, in this scenario, going to undertake management of a project that someone, maybe it's you, thinks is important because of what it will achieve. But regardless of the other project outcomes, a serious safety incident will mean that your project is remembered as that project. Your time, your budget, your key person risk considerations are all hard measures of health and safety risk and how it impacts your project. But equally importantly, you or your colleague could be that impact in a softer sense if a risk incident occurs. So what's the aim in risk management here? Well, what we're trying to do is give ourselves a framework within which we can make decisions. We all make decisions in our daily lives that are based upon our personal perceptions of risk. So perception of risk, I have a fear of heights. A parachutist, I don't think has a fear of heights. You have 2 chances of getting me to jump out of a plane, regardless of how good you tell me that parachute is. One of them is none, and the other is Buckley's. So we each, myself and the parachutist, have a different risk perspective. The framework is trying to work away from that and give us an objective thinking in our risk decision making. The organisation you're working for should be the driver for that. They should give you guidance on what is and isn't acceptable in terms of risk taking. One of the other things to remember with health and safety is we have a concept, we call it ALARP, as low as reasonably practicable. Risk isn't about removing, or risk management isn't about removing all risk, it's about managing the risk to as low as reasonably practicable. So when we make these decisions, we are left with what's called residual risk. Residual risk is the acceptable risk to us as an organisation. The other good thing about taking this framework is it starts to give you some measures. When you start introducing what we call controls, methods to control the risk, that you have guidance on what you need to achieve. We'll go a bit into that later on, but you're now able to measure what is going on. So what can go wrong? Okay, we've already discussed this risk is a matter of life and death. I've got one case study which I want to talk about. Now, the coroner's court is a strange place when we think of a court because at that court they do away with things like the rules of evidence. They don't apply. Because the aim of the coroner's court is to find out what went wrong and, more importantly, what can be done to stop it from happening again. They don't lay charges. They can recommend that things be investigated, but they don't actually make a decision on who's to blame, whose fault it is. Although sometimes it's bleedingly obvious. So what do we learn through Jason Garrels? Jason was a labourer on a construction workplace in central Queensland. The site was set up. It was going to become a small little subdivision. Imagine a main road and 3 little side spur roads coming off the side of it. The project manager, the builder, the developer, hadn't really done much in the way of planning, and all he knew was he had to do what it was. It was very haphazard, and he was trying to set up electricity so that the site could start to be constructed. So many things required electricity. So it was going to be a temporary setup, and they were going to put underground cabling through to what are called construction switchboards, temporary construction switchboards. You'll see them on a building site. It's just a pole, a box up the top of it, where the builders can plug stuff into. Unfortunately, what he hadn't taken into account was, gosh forbid, rain happens. Who knew? The electricity supply was done, 2 streets, 1 to go. Anyway, the electrician had to go back and do some stuff to isolate. Isolate means to turn off the electricity supply to this particular part of the network. He didn't get back, he got distracted. Things were taking a lot longer than necessary because of all the wet conditions. The backhoe operator, being a diligent man, decided to keep on going, keep on burying the cable, which was fine. And he got to the last or near last stage, and he just needed to have this temporary construction switchboard pulled up, held in position while he backfilled around it. Jason thought he was helping. He lifted the temporary construction switchboard, or should I say he attempted to lift the construction switchboard, and unfortunately passed. There's other lessons from Jason, but that'll do for now. What we did learn was there was no plan. There was no risk assessment. There were no controls. We also made a reasonably safe assessment that had there been these things, Jason would have gone home again that day. So what are the key concepts in risk management? The first of them is hazard. A hazard can be described in a number of ways, but essentially what you are describing is the event that you do not want to occur. It could be described as a person coming into contact with the machine, a person being exposed to a chemical leak. Probability or likelihood is the next concept we're going to touch on. Probability can be a little tough because you're trying to do this using foresight in evaluating risks. Some will try and measure it in odds, a 1 in 100 or a 1 in a million event. Some will use descriptive words, phrases ranging from almost certain to conceivable. Exposure. Exposure is how often or for how long a person faces the risk. It's here that if you've got statistics, they are really helpful in being able to drive your decision making. So for example, if you know you've decided that the odds are 1 in 100, and in your project you're going to do this thing 100 times, well, you've got something that's probably going to start your marketing campaign for a control to be introduced. And you'll hear me use the word marketing a few times. One of the things with health and safety is you need to think about marketing. You're going to have to sell this both up and down the line. One of the reasons health and safety is a frequent starting point for risk management is that the consequences of the risk are so easy to define. They simply range in grade from first aid through permanent injury and ultimately, of course, death. So your first step is to identify the hazards that are likely to impact your project. In a physical sense, you need to look at the site. You need to go and see what the circumstances are. Be a little bit cynical. Don't trust everybody, and don't simply trust a plan that someone said of the layout of the site. It's amazing how quickly those things change. You go out there wasn't a ditch there, now there is. Why is the ditch there and not there? It's because when the backhoe started going through there was a large rock, so they've moved. Recognise that you're there to manage a project. I realise a lot of times project managers wear 2 different hats, but in this context you're a project manager. You're not necessarily an expert or someone experienced in the field, so use the people that are, the people in the workplace. They've got years of experience looking at these very risks. They know what they are. They've just never really been invited to express them in a formal sense. Again, with marketing, this is another stage where inviting them in, you're getting them to buy into the project. You're marketing it to them. When you're looking for past records to try and figure out what might be there, again, be a little bit cynical. If you're a large organisation and you have been around for a while, there are going to be every possibility of incidents. Why can't you find the records? Because no one's bothered recording them. One of the points you might want to look at is near misses. These are events which don't really have any ramifications, but while the textbooks will give you different definitions, I think, wow, that was close, is a pretty good guide. Apart from being able to, an opportunity to learn without the impact of an incident, it also allows us to record the details for later statistical analysis. Again, it helps in marketing. In a past job I was in, we had a safety talk. We were told that statistically 1 in 20 electrical incidents is a fatality. We were then told that our current incident count had reached 30. I can assure you we started to listen to the rest of that talk with a bit more renewed energy. The next step, you're going to assess the risk. And this is where risk management really starts to come in to play. Because if you're going to manage something, you need to measure it. You need to understand where you are and where you are going. And the only way to do that is through measurement. There's a multitude of methodologies out there. But the most common of them will all use some sort of matrix comparing your probability to your exposure, telling you how likely you're going to have, and then comparing that to a consequence to give you an ultimate risk. Some of them are mathematical, but they're all basically that same flow of compare your likelihood to your exposure to your consequence. It's your organisation that really needs to decide what's going to work best for you. In highly dangerous petrochemical, nuclear type industries, they use a lot of grades. So they're really trying to fine level of detail in their grading as to what is acceptable or not. For you guys, most of the time, a traffic control system is going to work best. It's a simple process. You grade everything, it ends up in a consequence, red, amber or green. What does it mean? Red means unacceptable. Green means go ahead. Amber means something different. But usually something along the lines of an active management. So for example, you might be monitoring an exposure to a particular chemical or something like that throughout the day, and an alarm sounds if the exposure is too high. Importantly, record all of these calculations and assumptions. They're going to become important for you when you look back at how you've gone. Next, decide on your controls. I've already mentioned as low as reasonably practicable. That's what you're driving for. It needs to be both acceptable and as low as reasonably practicable. The first thing you ask is, can we eliminate the risk? Can we stop it from happening? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes no. If the answer is no, we look at engineering controls. We choose these because what we're doing is changing the environment. We're not relying on people. Examples of that, isolation. We put barriers between the people and the machine. Substitution, we replace the dangerous chemical with one that's less dangerous. If that doesn't work, and frequently it doesn't, we go to a lower level of control, the administrative controls. We set up rules, policies, procedures to be followed. That doesn't always work because we're relying on people to be obedient. They get distracted, they simply don't want to follow the rules. Finally, if you aren't there, we have PPE, personal protective equipment. As the name implies, it is protection, but it relies on it being used, being maintained and being replaced. For example, hard hats. You're not supposed to have stickers on them. I challenge you to find a construction site in the city of Brisbane which has got a clean hat on it. You'll be looking for a long time. By grading the residual risks, by understanding what risk you've got at the end, you've started to figure out how effective your controls are going to be. Again, record your thinking in the calculations for the same reasons we recorded the original ones. Very importantly, step 4, make sure you implement the controls before you start work. Finally, monitor your risks. Risk management is management. It's an ongoing activity. Throughout the project, you're going to learn in real life how effective your controls are. Keep taking notes about it. It might help in future discussions around risk. If your project changes, or when your project changes, go back to your records on risk and ask if any of the assumptions are no longer valid. Keep an eye on new technology and products that might allow you to control a risk more effectively. Your project team may change. You'll have more people, less people, new people, and again, this may affect your assumptions. You went into the project at the start with a whole heap of seasoned bodies who'd been around for 10 years, and suddenly you introduce a few newbies. One little reminder. Throughout this, you're going to become the project manager. And in this particular context, you're going to be the risk manager too. The word manager is in your job title because it is part of your job. So make sure you allow yourself time in the project plan to manage and monitor the risk. Lastly, those thoughts again, work safe for the moments that matter. When you're dealing in your post-project review, make sure you look at how effectively health and safety was managed. Being on time and on budget is important, but it's more important to be safe.